everyone, and welcome to Debating Metal. I'm your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, and along with my co-host, Chris Kaye, we discuss and dissect our favorite music, heavy metal. So sit back, relax, pop open a cold one, and let the debate begin. Welcome back. I am the Dean of Metal, Kenneth Dean.
And I'm Chris Kaye.
And we're here for another week of Debating Metal. This is episode 6.
Oh, 6 already.
We're up to 6. A month and a half now. That's awesome.
Part of the number of the beast.
Yes. There's another 2 6s to go. So let's start off real quick here. Recap what we did last week. We spoke about artists who went solo.
We talked about guys like Ace Frehley.
Bruce Dickinson,
Rob Halford,
and Slash.
Guys that had a promising career before, went off on their own and did some great things. And some that did some, mediocre things.
And 3 out of those 4 that we just mentioned actually went back to their original bands.
Yep.
And I think for Bruce and Rob, it ultimately was one of those things that they just had to cleanse themselves.
I think didn't technically all of them go back to their original bands at one point?
Ace
he's not
went
with them
back,
now.
but then he's not with them now. Ultimately,
but he did that really awesome Psycho Circus album.
Well, you got to criticize. that was not good. Not at all. We also talked about what was the Big 4 last week.
We did our Big 4 best and worst replacement singers.
Oh, that's right. And if you check us out online, you'll see what we posted online on social media, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. All have our choices for a Big 4 worst and best replacement singers. All right, we've got some current events, and it was weird because the current event that we're talking about actually kind of ties into what we're going to be talking about on today's episode. Today's episode is going to be artists who live off their legacy. And this one particular artist, although he doesn't have much of a legacy,
a very tiny legacy,
a 2-year legacy with the band, and we actually recorded an album that got deleted, for lack of a better term. Dan Nelson, the former singer for Anthrax, he was there for 2 years, 2007 to 2009. In between, they're going from John to Joey to Joey to John. They threw Dan in there, and then they went back to John again briefly.
They were trying to do something a little different with the growly vocals, and it just didn't really work.
No,
to be honest.
So the current event with Dan was he pleaded guilty to an assault charge, and the assault charge was one assault charge on a person older than 65 years old, which I never knew existed.
I didn't know that we specified age of like how we, who we can assault by age.
Yeah, that was weird. Apparently, he had a really bad show. And these 2 gentlemen were with one of the, I think it was the guitar player in the band. They were just, friends of his or cousins or family, whatever it was. And they ended up in the elevator with Dan Nelson. And as they were trying to strike up conversation, one of the gentlemen said, "Rough show, huh?" And it got a little rough in the elevator, apparently, as the guy got punched and kicked by Dan Nelson.
Yeah, he said he took him down MMA style and then began attacking the other guy when he tried to help. Right,
and then the other guy apparently lost all his hearing aids.
Yeah,
that was tough.
Not to laugh at a bad situation, but reading the article and he hit me so hard, knocked my hearing aids out. Was tough not to find a little bit of humor in.
Yeah, no, that was quite humorous. We don't do a lot of drinking on the air, and I know a couple of other websites love to talk about beer. Not websites, excuse me, another couple podcasts love to talk about beer. But today we have with us, one for each of us, Iron Maiden's Trooper Beer, the Sun and Steel Sake Lager edition. I'm not a huge beer drinker, but I will try this. I know it's not new, but it was available at my local liquor store. And I'm going to try it. We're going to try it, Chris and I.
I'm pretty excited about it. I'm a big fan of sake, so...
Well, let's try it.
Sake bombs in
let's
college.
Do this. Hey, works, right? Oh, yeah. Love the pop. Snap. Crackle.
It smells good.
Okay. Wow, better than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty good.
It is very good.
So, yeah, if you can get your hands on some Trooper beer, Sun and Steel, definitely try it out.
That's really good. I'm not a big beer drinker, so that's pretty cool. All right, this week's topic, we are talking about artists who live off their legacy. So essentially it means is like a guy, let's say, for instance, Dan Nelson, who was in a band for a while and does not have necessarily a very long career with the band, and then basically is kicked out or quits, goes on to do his own thing, but can't kind of let go of where the legacy he was in that band, and he'll either start a band with the same name or just do stuff, sing songs that may not pertain to him, stuff like that. So we're going to talk about a few guys today, and then we'll talk about our big four later, and we'll let you know what that is in a little bit. So who are we going to start off with today?
I mean, why don't we start off with one that's pretty middle of the road, I would say, on this one would be Paul Deanno.
Okay.
Original lead singer, Iron Maiden. Huge fan of Paul's first two albums with Iron Maiden. I think there's a lot of fans out there that kind of stick to those two albums, that they are the Iron Maiden albums, and really would love to see that lineup again. Fans that go to see him specifically for that reason. And I understand he just announced his retirement.
Yeah, he's got, he's got one more show I think he's going to do this year, and it's actually going to be a collective with other guys that used to be in Iron Maiden, and this is even before they were recording artists. I think the only other guy who actually recorded on the album was Dennis Stratton.
Yeah.
But they have like one of the Terrys that was in the band.
One of the Terrys.
I think Doug Sampson, the drummer, is going to be there. So they got five guys, and it's going to be Paul's last show because his ailing health is preventing him from continuing the tour.
That's really too bad to hear.
That is sad to hear, but I did read an interview with him, and he's excited that Iron Maiden is still going strong, and as long as Iron Maiden is still going strong, he's going to feel a part of it.
Well, he's always been kind of positive. I mean, in the early years, right after he got kicked out of the band, I'm sure there was some raw feelings, but he's always been kind of positive, and I've heard him in multiple interviews, speak highly of Bruce, speak highly of what they've done. He said he loved Number the Beast. So, it's hard to have any ill will towards the guy for continuing on doing, Iron Maiden, even though he's still also doing a lot of his own material.
Right. And I give him, like, of all the people we're going to talk about, I give him probably the most leniency because he was there for 2 albums. And with those 2 albums,
he was a big part of the songwriting process.
He created that legacy, which is, it's a little bit different than some of the other guys we're going to mention.
Yeah.
Like you said, like you brought up, there are people who will not listen to anything after Number to Be. So their Iron Maiden is really, really old. Mm-hmm. And me personally, I can't understand how they would want to just live in that time period and not expand. I mean, it's just the same as the Bruce fans who won't listen to anything after Fear of the Dark.
Metallica fans that won't listen to anything after those first 4 albums.
Correct. Same thing. And people who limit themselves like that are I don't understand that personally. But yeah, so there are a lot of Paul fans who won't listen to anything from Bruce. So I wonder if they listened to anything when Blaze was there.
I wonder if they listened to anything that he did in his solo career or with Killers or any of the other incarnations that he put out there.
That's true. Now you brought something up, then that's the reason why we kind of made this episode. His band that he created, and this was several years after, I think it was in the early 90s.
Yeah, he initially did Deanno, and he did another band after that. I can't remember.
Yeah, he did a few, but Killers specifically is kind of what I'm quote-unquote criticizing. You have a guy who, for the most part, tried to venture off into his own, created his own identity to some degree, and then kind of changed it because he kind of went back towards playing metal because he got away from it for a little bit.
Yeah.
Instead of coming up with a very creative and new name, he decides to name his band Killers after the album that he wrote with Iron Maiden called Killers.
Well, here's a valid question. Did he really come up with that name, or was it the pressure of the
like management bestowed it upon him?
Yeah, because a lot of times that kind of stuff does happen where the management will come and say, hey, this is a good idea. This is how we can market you.
True.
So it's possible that there was some of that in there, and I really don't know. I'd love to ask the guy, but
It would be interesting to ask him that. Although I think, if I'm not mistaken, he used the logo, the Killers logo, as one of the logo for the thing. So that right there. I mean, maybe he had no say in the matter. Okay, I get that if that's the case, but I just think, pertaining to our conversation today, it adds to the fuel to the fire of someone living off their legacy.
Yeah.
Who, like I said, I give him the most props because he did those 2 albums, those songs he did right, and he was part of that. He toured behind it. He did 2 world tours behind it. I get that. Some of the other guys, not so much.
Well, even more so, I mean, it used, like, Paul Deanno's name was in the Iron Maiden font. Mm-hmm. So it was, recognizable that branding is already there.
Right.
Somebody sees that, goes, oh, Iron Maiden, oh, Paul Deanno.
Right.
And then, even further than that, a few years later, he got with Dennis Stratton, who had been on...
He was on Iron
Praying
Man.
Mantis as well.
Yes.
And then they did the original Iron Man. But you can't tell me that's not a direct...
Oh, yeah. No, that's
a play on Iron Maiden.
Yeah, and it's 2 guys that were in Iron Maiden, again, living off the legacy. Mm-hmm. So Dennis Stratton is also one that you were going to mention, and he's part of that.
Yeah, I mean, he's less so, I think, has done other projects and just kind of is one of those guys that just wants to play. So I don't really feel as much on that, but he's worked with Paul Deanno quite a bit since they both were out of Iron Maiden.
Yeah, well, I'm one of those people who like Iron Maiden more than Killers, even though a lot of people say, oh, it was so much more mature.
I agree. I like the rawness, and I like the songs on Iron Maiden better.
Yeah.
Killers to me, and I know this, Killers was kind of some of the leftovers from the recording process. And yeah, it's a more mature album in that it sounds nicer, the production's better. There's something about that first Iron Maiden album.
Oh, the rawness of that first Iron Maiden album is incredible. I mean, as soon as it hits you with that first song, you could just tell that something special is happening there.
Yeah.
Leftover song like Wrathchild, although it was recorded better and there's better production, you could tell that it wasn't. It has
the same feel.
It had its ties to the first album. It was the first album that basically attracted me. Although I picked up on Iron Maiden during Number of the Beast, but that first album to me was just always better than Killers.
Yeah.
Now Killers cover, I mean, that was everywhere when I was growing up. I mean, it's everywhere now, but it was everywhere. Any Iron Maiden shirt you saw, it was Killers.
Oh, it's one of the coolest album covers from that band.
Oh yeah,
I love the contrast, the look of it. Yeah,
yeah, it was quite different.
And coincidentally, it's the only Funko Pop that hasn't come to me yet. I got the Iron Maiden Funko Pops, which they are freaking awesome.
Yes, those are the coolest things.
Quality control is great. They look great. I would definitely, if you're an Iron Maiden fan, go find them. They're awesome.
Those are cool. I'm getting mine hopefully next week. So, all right, moving on from Paul, we're going to talk about now this particular person that we're going to talk about. His legacy in the band is solidified because he's been there forever. But what he's doing now is where it kind of throws things off. And I'm talking about Stephen Riley from LA Guns. Now, Stephen Riley, I give him all the credit in the world. He's been in LA Guns since the end of the recording of the first album. He joined up right at the end. He did one song on the album, and he was on there for almost every single album afterward. There was a period of time where he left, had a different drummer. Actually had 3 drummers on one album.
Their history is a little murky to me.
Oh, it's crazy.
I haven't really followed them, but I know some about their history, and just there was several different versions of the band.
Well, now there is, and even then, for a little while, there was, like in the early 2000s. What happened was, the band as it became famous in the late 80s, contained Phil Lewis on vocals, Tracy Guns on guitar, Kelly Nichols and Mike Cripps on bass and guitar, respectively. And eventually, they recorded 3 albums together. Actually, Stephen Riley joined at the end of LA Guns, the first album, so they pretty much were together for 4 albums. Then 3 albums. Then on the 4th album, Stephen left, and then he came back on the 5th album. And then Phil Lewis left on the 6th album. And And Phil Lewis came back, and they were all together again, except for Kelly Nichols had left. So the core of Phil, Tracy, and Steven were there together for most of the time. So they got together in 88, 87-ish, all the way into the 2000s. But then somewhere in the 2000s, things went a little haywire. And Tracy and Steven had a falling out. So Tracy left. Tracy made his own version of LA Guns called Tracy Guns, LA Guns. Steven and Phil kept the LA Guns name. They toured and they continued. They made a few more albums. But then somewhere in the 2010s, if you want to put it that way, Phil Lewis and Tracy Guns got back together. They put Steven aside. And so Steven was no longer in LA Guns, and he really, on the public side of it, didn't really care. Or I don't want to say didn't really. On the public side of it, no one saw what was happening. Then last year, 2019, the second album that LA Guns put out since the reunion of Tracy Guns and Phil Lewis, Steven got an offer to play one of those German festivals out in Europe as LA Guns. So he decides to put a band together and make his version of LA Guns. Now, this is where I have a problem.
I thought this was much earlier, was when he separated from them and formed. Because I remember Tracy Guns talking about.
Because he was with Phil Lewis. Steven and Phil Lewis were together for a long time without Tracy. And that was the two touring factions that went out.
Okay.
Then when it was 2017, Phil and Tracy got back together.
Okay.
And then they kicked Steven out. I think that happened during one of that metal shows.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of remembering. This was years ago.
Well, technically you're looking at 3 years ago. A little more than 3 years ago. So Steven was out of the band for, a couple of years, and all of a sudden he gets offered, hey, the promoters call him up, say, hey, and that's probably because he was probably a big guy behind the scenes with LA Guns. He gets offered to do a European show, supposedly one. And it was supposed to be a one-off. It was one of these ones where like all these guys who live off their legacy play. One guy remains, and they got a band that's the original band. So he was on that show, and now, because I don't know if it was because of the success of that show or because he'd been offered more, he has his own version of LA Guns. Now, what I don't like, and this is why I'm criticizing him, is that he's a drummer. And yes, his name is on all the songwriting credits for the time that he was in LA Guns. But I think that's more a mechanism of the corporation, for finance's sake. Everybody in the band, the 5 original members, get an equal share. Guns N' Roses did it. All these bands did it for a long time until people start leaving here and there, and then the corporations kind of fold. Regardless of whether he's an original member, you don't have the original singer, you don't have the original guitar player, you don't have anything.
That's where it really starts getting shaky to me.
That's, to me, is where it's like, why am I going to go see Stephen Riley's LA Guns when Tracy Guns and Phil Lewis, the original singer and guitar player for LA Guns, is out there touring?
Yeah.
That's like me wanting to go see, some bass player who happens to be, the first album of the band. I mean, he has nothing to do with it, really. Yeah. I mean, not to say Steven didn't have anything to do with it, because, again, he was there for so many albums. I mean, he brings the rhythm, the beat in the background, but he doesn't bring the vocals. He doesn't bring the guitar
It's
sound.
important, but it's not what's identifiable.
Right. It's like me saying, oh, I'm going to go see Dizzy Reed because he was in Guns N' Roses because he's got a Guns N' Roses set.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing there, So I don't know. That's my thing. I don't particularly like it. I wouldn't go see it.
Yeah.
I think it's bullshit, quite honestly, but he's out there doing it. More power to him.
Well, then let me bring up somebody that it did not go well for when trying to do the same thing.
All right, who are you talking about?
Rod Evans, the original singer for Deep Purple. So he got kicked out of the band. They wanted to change their sound, become more commercial, a bigger band, and he just wasn't ever going to do that. They were kind of like a Renaissance kind of feeling band for those first 3 albums, and they just needed to change. So they got in Ian Gillan, and obviously everybody knows what happened after that. I mean, they put out some of their greatest albums.
Oh yeah,
that's the identifiable
the Mark II lineup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in 1980, like kind of what we were talking about before, one of the management guys came in and said, "Hey, why don't you start touring as Deep Purple?" So they put on a few shows. Yeah, and it was just Rod Evans and some other guys from other bands.
What was the bass player's the original bass player's name? Do you remember?
From Deep Purple?
Yeah.
Oh.
Which was the one that got inducted into Hall of Fame? Was it the bass player?
The one that got inducted?
Yeah, because one of those two did not get into.
It was Rod Evans.
He did. He did. Okay,
yeah.
So the bass player did not.
No, he didn't. Okay. He got snubbed. So
it's just weird.
Yeah, so they started doing some shows as Deep Purple, and people realized they weren't going to see the actual Deep Purple and started rioting because nobody was there that they were expecting. There was even like a letter sent out before the last couple of shows saying these members of Deep Purple will not be appearing, and even had Glenn Hughes' name misspelled on it.
Glenn Hughes, jeez.
Well, because that was during the
oh, that's true. That was
Glenn Hughes
in the 80s. That's right.
David Coverdale version. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they basically the management of Deep Purple sued him for $672,000.
Wow.
As part of the lawsuit, which he lost, he no longer gets royalties for Deep Purple songs.
Oh. Well, I mean, here's the funny thing. He's only got the first 3 albums. Mm-hmm. So there was Shades of Deep Purple, and I can't remember the third one now. And none of those, other than the single Hush, did anything. You know,
but at that point, you have to think 1980 is not that far off from those albums being around.
I'm thinking about it in today's terms. But
yeah, they were still available to purchase those albums at that point.
I can see that.
So, but even now, think about it. Any re-releases of those albums, which they did do remasters a few years back, he doesn't get anything for anymore. Which is probably why he didn't show up to the Rock and Roll Hall of Shame induction.
Oh, I love that. We'll talk about that another time. I mean, like I said, he played on the first 3, which were almost insignificant. I mean, they had a single with Hush. It wasn't that it wasn't that great of a version, but theirs, I guess, was better than, was it Neil Diamond? I think is the one who did the original.
Yeah.
So it wasn't absolutely, the best version, but
I'm sure they had popular. Their fan base back then.
Right, they had the fan base. They released, Deep Purple released, I forgot what it was called now. It was something Perfect Strangers. It was after they reunited. They put out a live album, and they re-recorded Hush with Ian Gillan. Love that version. That's a really cool version of that song.
I've always been partial to that. Whenever a new singer comes into the band, to hear them come and play a few versions of older songs. They did it with Bruce when he came in to Iron Maiden. They had him record Wrathchild, and there's a couple. Well,
in '88 he did Charlotte the Harlot and another song off of the first album.
Yeah,
I like his version of Wrathchild almost as much as I like the original Paul Deanno.
I love his version of Wrathchild.
I didn't like the ones that he did on. It was on the Evil That Men Do single. I didn't like those ones as much because they still had that synthesizer guitar sound, and it didn't.
Which I like.
Yeah, you like it. I don't. That I think you're going from these awesome sounding raw songs from the original album, then you got this really way overproduced, slick sounding, very compressed versions with Bruce. That's why I liked Wrathchild that came out on Ed Hunter as a bonus track. Actually, it was a secret bonus track. That version was pretty cool because that was a little more raw.
I mean, I don't mind it. It's just to me, it's always a bonus. It's something that they're not obligated to do, but it's nice that you get to hear that studio version of the new singer singing those songs.
Yeah, that's pretty
especially
cool.
When they're a good singer and not a bad replacement.
Oh, exactly. Yes. All right. So Rod Evans got basically financially screwed out of his share. He screwed himself out of it.
I mean, it's tough to say. I mean, did he really screw himself, or did he just get some bad advice? I mean, it sounds like he just really got some bad advice and went along with it and shouldn't have.
Oh, I guess. And the funny thing is, the time period that we're talking about here, the early 80s or 1980 itself.
1980, yeah.
That stuff didn't exist like it does now. Okay. So yeah, so back then it was definitely one of those where you're crossing the line trying to be somebody that you're not.
Yeah.
Nowadays, because the information is out there, it's so you can tell who is and who isn't playing, certain dates or whatever. If you're savvy enough, and you don't even have to be that savvy, but you just have to have an internet connection, and a phone nowadays.
But amazingly, there's still people that show up to the show and have no idea what's going on.
Right. That's the faction of people who are not as savvy, I guess you could say.
Like the fellow behind us when we went to see Queensryche.
Yeah.
You guys are old, but you can still rock.
Oh, God, that was... I turn around, the guy's got one tooth. I'm like, really? Really? Oh, jeez. That was... And he kept saying it, too. It's like, dude, like you
one
think
of those
they hear
guys
you?
that keeps looking around to see who's laughing. Nobody is.
All right, so Rod got that problem, and he basically screws himself out of, regardless of whether it was his mistake or bad management, he chose to go ahead and do it instead of saying, you know what, this doesn't sound like it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's up to him. Someone else on this list I'm going to mention is Neil Turbin from Anthrax, first singer. Yeah, first, second singer, whatever it was, because there was couples. There was like
he's the first that appeared on an album.
Right, he was the first on the album. So he recorded the first album, Fistful of Metal, with Anthrax. He was the one who was instrumental in getting Dan Lilker fired before he ultimately got fired shortly thereafter.
Which is one of Scott Ian's good friends.
Yes. If Dan Lilker doesn't leave Anthrax, I wonder whatever happens to Frankie Bello. So it kind of worked out, because now Frankie Bello is part of the corporation that is Anthrax now.
Yeah.
And Frankie's an amazing guy. He's a super cool dude, Neil... And this is kind of almost like a time delay when it comes to living off the legacy. He gets fired in 1984 after the North American tour, the first North American tour that Anthrax had. He goes solo, does his own thing, doesn't really jump on the Anthrax bandwagon until 2001. So we're talking 17 years later.
Death Riders. With
Death Riders. Of course, that's based on a song he wrote with Anthrax called Death Rider. That's where that's why he's in this episode today, because he comes up with a band named Death Riders. Again, not being able to come up with something original, as opposed to, living off your legacy. But Death Riders broke up. They did not have a long tenure. If you look up Neil Turbin on Setlist FM to see what shows he's been playing lately. And shout out to setlist.fm. They are one of the coolest websites where you can track all the shows you've ever been to, or pretty much almost every show you've ever been to, because if you have any knowledge of the show you went to, you could put it in there if it's not there. And I did that to a few. But you can almost every show out there in existence of all these rock bands, not even rock, any musical artist, they say what set list, where they played, what the date was, all the songs, and it's pretty cool. So if anybody's interested in checking out what show they went to and what songs were played and you don't remember, it will be on there. Setlist.fm. And we're not getting paid for that. It's just a really cool website.
But we would like to.
But on March 4th, 2018, so this is 2 years ago, so this is not necessarily, this is the most recent concert that was listed. Neil Turbin played the entire Fistful of Metal album. That's living off your legacy. Even the instrumental song that he probably wasn't a part of because he didn't have anything to sing.
Okay.
So,
I mean, there's nothing wrong with him playing songs off of the album he was a part of.
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
You kind of got to expect he's going to play some of his other stuff.
But nothing. It was all Fistful of Metal, the entire show. So he basically went in there thinking he was Anthrax. So that's where I get critical of these artists. You're not doing anything other than what you were known for. You're almost doing it like as if you were them. Again, in this particular case, it's at least he didn't do songs from another era. At least he's not doing songs from worship music that he was not a part of. We have one we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
So Neil Turbin, again, he It's his most recent concert that is listed on setlist.fm, and it's the entire Fistful of Metal album. Who you got next?
I got one that I love this guy, but you have to address it, is Tony Iommi.
Tony Iommi?
And we'll think about it this way. And he does now, I mean, he's retired. And hopefully they do what they talked about, where in 2022, there's the Goodwill Games coming to, I think it's Birmingham. Mm-hmm. And they talked about doing a Black Sabbath reunion, just a one-off, one-shot, just the 4 original guys doing a short concert.
Okay. Yeah,
that would be cool.
That would be cool.
I mean, think about from 1986 to 1990, and even a little bit beyond that, past the Dehumanizer reunion with the Dio era. That time with Seventh Star, where you had Glenn Hughes singing, he was the only original member. I mean, that wasn't even supposed to be a Black Sabbath album.
See, and that's a perfect example of how someone got pressured into doing something that he didn't necessarily want to do.
Exactly. Now, that's what I'm referring to, is not necessarily him just living off the legacy, but the recording company saying, hey, we're not going to release this unless you put it out as a Black Sabbath album.
Right.
And he had to bow to the pressure to make sure that his music got out there.
Yeah.
And so that's, to me, it's less him living off the legacy as the company.
Yeah, no, for sure. The record, and that may have also been an obligation that he had. You know, like they may have been signed for 5 albums, and all of a sudden now he's got no singer.
From what I understand, that wasn't the case.
Okay.
But they originally were going to allow him to release it as a Tony Iommi album, even allowing him to take the photo that was on the cover with just him, which was kind of funny because he was the only one left.
Was that the one where he's looking into space going, why am I the only one here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, they do. So they have this band. They have Tony Martin, the singer, come and do Headless Cross, which was a pretty popular album. Had more of an 80s metal vibe. He's a completely different kind of singer than the last few.
Right.
Before that, they did Eternal Idol, which was another one of those kind of... It was an okay album, but there was a lot of factors in there. They had Ray Gillen in there writing music before Tony Martin took over, and it was just upheaval.
Right.
Kind of like what was the one before Ozzy left? Never Say Die.
Never Say Die.
So they did Headless Cross, and it's pretty popular. It's actually among Black Sabbath fans still considered a good album.
Right.
And then they do Tear, which was... They had to even cut off the tour before it was over because they had poor ticket sales towards the end.
Right.
So they're still living on the Black Sabbath name at that point, and it's just not Black Sabbath, you know?
No, at that point, I mean, yeah, you're talking late 80s, right? Mid to late 80s. Sabbath hadn't been anything of any consequence since 1983, 84.
Yeah. I know when I think of Black Sabbath, when somebody says, I think of Tony Martin, Neil Murray, and Cozy Powell.
Yeah, those guys. No.
So
you're almost talking about Whitesnake there.
Actually, like most bands from the 80s, Cozy Powell was in just about all of them.
Yeah,
Neil Murray. So you get to 1990. They do the Dehumanizer, which was 92 actually.
Right.
They reformed.
So they reformed with the Dio era. Mm-hmm. Still not with Ozzy because Ozzy's doing his own thing.
But you've got Geezer Butler back in the band,
right?
Which is one of the biggest. Yeah,
and
that makes me feel like more this is Black Sabbath.
Right, and then you got Vinny Appice.
Who
right, so that's the Mob Rules album. So at least you have some semblance of what Black Sabbath was, even though it was only half technically.
It still feels like Black Sabbath again,
right?
But then you go back right after Dehumanizer when they break up again, and he gets Tony Martin back, goes back to kind of this.
Did he do another album though? At that point.
With Tony Martin?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did Cross Purposes.
Oh,
which
God,
they actually did.
That was terrible. Oh, no, wait.
2 more albums.
Forbidden.
Forbidden was the real bad one.
That was horrible.
But that's the same lineup as Tear. So,
that's why it was horrible.
Yeah. So they did Cross Purposes, which, again, was not supposed to be a Black Sabbath album. Cross Purposes was supposed to be a Geezer Butler and Tony Iommi project together.
Well, might as well make it Black Sabbath. That's the same thing. Tony and Geezer, it's a Black Sabbath album.
But again, you're having Tony Martin as the singer, And that's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to
at
do
least
something
with Tony,
different.
there's some continuity.
There is.
So that's probably where that thought process came from.
Well, they didn't want to do it as a Black Sabbath album.
Well,
The
that's their
record company
problem.
again said, "Hey, you're putting this out as a Black Sabbath album, or it's not going out."
And where are the record companies now? Yeah, exactly. Tell me about it, there, record company guy.
So yeah, then they did Forbidden, which was just dreadful.
I
But
have that promo.
it was a cool cover.
That cartoon
The cartoon.
with the devil on it.
Yeah,
The Grim Reaper.
Grim Reaper.
Yeah, no, that was terrible. It's all terrible.
So that's the gist of it. I mean, I have a hard time pinning it on Tony because I have so much respect for the guy, but it's the record company pressures that force us to take this in as Black Sabbath when it's really not.
No, for sure. I mean that's if you're going to sit there and pin something like that on Tony, I mean it's definitely not his fault. He went out of his way to say I didn't want this to be a Black Sabbath record, but
And he wants to put his music out.
right. Well,
get it.
Everybody wants to put their music out, and that's.
So let me change my entry and call it the record company.
No, I mean it's, for lack of a better term, whoever it was, they were living off the legacy, and there's nothing, we may be debating this and criticizing it. It sounds, we're, first of all, before anything, even though we've already gone half hour talking about this, we love all these bands. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about it if we didn't love these bands. And part of loving these bands is they become part of your soul. They become part of who you are. And sometimes, there are people out there like, the fans that won't listen past Paul. They're so deeply ingrained in your body and your spirit that, it becomes part of you. It's your life. That's the way it is for us. For you and me, we are metalheads. We will always be metalheads till the day we're in an old folks' home and we're cranking stuff on our little Bluetooth speaker, that people would not normally be playing in an old folks' home.
Buried in kids' coffins.
Exactly. So, that's what, why we're doing. We have this podcast because we love the music. We have this podcast because we cannot stop talking about things that we love in this particular genre. Props to Tony. He, recently going through cancer and still touring and still putting Black Sabbath, through what they're doing or what they did. He is the godfather of heavy metal as far as the riffs, the guitar playing, the sound, the tone, all that stuff. Black Sabbath was where they're considered the first, but we love everybody. We love them all.
And let me put this out there. I went through and I bought physical copies of every single Black Sabbath album that existed. I found them all, and this was in a time when Amazon wasn't as easily accessible. Like you couldn't just find everything. So I went out and found everything, every single one of them, and I listened to every single one of them multiple times, even the bad ones, even the weaker albums.
I don't think I ever got through Forbidden.
I did. But
I think I listened to the first track, and I don't even remember it anymore.
And I'll tell you why I listened to it multiple times, because I paid $15.99 for it, and I was gonna get my money's worth.
Yeah, I didn't pay for mine, and it still has a big sticker on the front that says the record company can take it back if they want to.
I remember how much it cost because I had bought Cross Purposes and I want to say it was Headless Cross at the same time, and both of those were about $4 or something.
Tony thanks you, by the way, because you were one of the 5 that bought it.
And so I paid like $4.20 or something like that for those 2 albums. And I bought Forbidden, which was the worst one, and I had to pay
full price.
Yeah, $15.99.
I think there were more promos made of that than there was actual sales. No,
I had a rap song on it. That's the worst part.
We joke because we can, and it's the only way to enjoy this stuff. You have to make light of the dark times, and you have to enjoy the good times. So there are plenty of artists like that. Tony is the master of what he does, and he had to go through a lean period. I mean, most artists go through a lean period. It's not every day where an artist can go through their career and never have a problem, period.
Yeah.
All of them have done it. Even the best ones, even the ones that are still out there today. I mean, the Rolling Stones went through a lean period. Metallica's going through a lean period. Iron Maiden went through a really lean period. So it's these artists. Kiss has gone through two lean periods. So it happens to the best of them, and it happened to Tony. And along those lines, being a British band, this person is not British. He's actually an American New Yorker. I want to talk about Jolynne Turner from Rainbow.
I just have to say that was such an awkward transition right here.
But we got to do something.
Just go with it.
The reason why I went with the British is because Richie was in Deep Purple, and Ian Gillan ended up being in Black Sabbath. So you see, there's the connection, the 6 degrees of separation of Black Sabbath. We're gonna have a whole episode on that one day. And Jolynne Turner's in there. Jolan Turner, former vocalist for Rainbow. I put him in this category for one big reason, and that was a few years ago when Rainbow reunited, for lack of a better term, or reformed or regenerated or whatever you want to call it. He was pining real hard in the media to become the singer for Rainbow. They were supposed to, he wanted a big reunion. He wanted, these big $1 million shows, these Wacken Festival type shows.
When was this?
If I'm not mistaken, this was in 2016 were the shows that Rainbow
so
had.
This was after he did Over the Rainbow with Richie's son. Okay.
Yes, after that.
Gotcha.
Richie put aside his Renaissance band and decided he wanted to redo Rainbow. So he put together a new band.
And for those of you who don't know, for a long time, Richie had completely dropped out of hard rock and was only doing this project with his wife that was Renaissance music.
Right. Pure Renaissance music. It wasn't bad. I listened to it. I have a couple of the downloads. It was interesting for that much, to say that much about it. And Candace Knight has got a beautiful voice.
It's not what most hard rock, like people that listen to Rainbow or Deep Purple, are going to go out.
No, definitely not. But any fan of the Rod Evans, Deep Purple might. But
valid point.
But Candace has a beautiful, beautiful voice. The band, I can't even remember what it was called, Blackmore's Night. They re-recorded or did a cover version, if you want, of Street of Dreams. Her on vocals and Jolyn Turner. They invited him to do it. So it was
cool.
Not as heavy, I guess, and the song itself is not heavy in general. But it was not as heavy, a little more keyboard laden than the original, which had keyboards in it. So it I guess, it's hard to describe it. It's not as heavy and not as and more keyboard laden than the first version. So Jolyn Turner at that point, was trying to plant the seed of, hey man, maybe we should get Rainbow back together. So Richie ended up being open to the idea, at least that planted the seed in his head. And eventually he decided to reform Rainbow. So now they're getting all these offers. Now, mind you, the person who is pursuing or pushing these offers is Joe. Okay? The offers are coming, but they're coming to Joe. They're not coming to Richie. Now, Richie's management has got his own thing. They've got their own thing going on where they're trying to reform Rainbow. And he's saying, no, I want to do this. So, Joe kept calling, and eventually they basically blew him off, and they sent him an email saying, you're not part of it. Goodbye. And so that's why I throw him in this category of living off your legacy, because his legacy was 5 years in Rainbow. And a couple
Which
years,
were Rainbow's most successful years,
yes,
too.
I'm not taking anything away from Joe in that regards. He was what Richie wanted. He basically was helped Richie get what he wanted, which was American success.
Yeah.
Of Rainbow. It was, that was 81 to 86. Now we're talking 2016. We're literally talking 20 years later. Or no, more than that. 30? Yeah, 30 years later.
30 years later.
So 30 years later. And funny thing is, other than the wrinkles in his face, Joe looks exactly the same. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. He's frozen in time.
Yeah.
You can tell he's older, but the hair is the same. Obviously he dyes his hair black. He wanted to do this reunion so bad, and then when it didn't happen, he criticized the crap out of it. He ripped Richie a new one about using a lame band, which two of the members were from Candace's Night or Blackmore's Night. He had gotten this singer named Ronnie. I forgot what the name of his band was. The singer can sing, and he can do all the different eras. And
I've heard some of that.
His voice is probably more reminiscent to the Ronnie James Dio era. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, he's got a little rasp to his voice.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I throw Joe in this, because, even though Joe has had a successful solo career, he went on to play with Yngwie. He did a stint in Deep Purple, but he has a long, long list of solo stuff. And I've heard some of his more recent solo stuff, and it's good. I mean, it's, like a pop power metal type stuff, and it's not bad. But it's not something that's going to gain him 1 million streams. You know, that the reason I throw him in is because he's trying to make this rainbow thing happen so bad. No, we got to do it. And it was, for him, I think it was more about trying to generate his last cash grab. And I feel, that's where I kind of like, all right, dude, you pushed this a little too hard. Richie didn't do it for a cash grab. Richie did it because he wanted to see, wanted to play the music again.
I think Richie just kind of does what he wants to do, and you can't fault him for that.
No, and I think that's the reason why Richie didn't do it with Joe, because he didn't want it as a cash grab. He wanted it to be purely about the music, even though, some criticism came back that it wasn't that good. Some criticism came back, you could tell he was rusty, metal. But Richie's Richie, and he's definitely older. He's in his mid-70s, trying to shred is not the same as it used to be.
And I would definitely mention what I kind of hit on before, which was he did a reunion of sorts with other Rainbow guys. It was called Over the Rainbow, and that was in 2011. Mm-hmm. And that was with Richie Blackmore's son.
Jurgen, right, you said?
Jurgen.
Yeah.
He didn't...
And there was a couple of other guys that were in Rainbow as well,
It was they had the kind of the blessing of Richie in a way.
Mm-hmm. Because it was
his son, but it was really not an affiliated project. It was a tribute band.
Right, it was a tribute.
Even though they were members of Rainbow.
Sort of like Dio's Disciples or The Last in Line.
But those happened after Dio had passed away, which was a little different.
Right, it's a little different, but it's still the same thing. A tribute of some sorts with original members involved.
Yeah.
So
it was you weren't gonna get, for the longest time, you weren't gonna get Richie Blackmore playing rock songs.
No.
So I get it.
All right. So who else you got?
So on a note that you brought up earlier about the drummer being the only guy in the band.
Oh, Stephen Riley.
Yeah. Frankie Banali.
Frankie Banali.
So Frankie Banali from Quiet Riot, version 2.
Version 2, yeah. Mach 2, version 2. Yeah, I mean, Frankie, he's a good example of what we're talking about, because was he an original member?
In a way.
In a way, yes. In a way, no, because if you want to go all the way back to 78, no. If you want to go back to the Reformation, yes, so...
Yeah, but that being said, at this point, he's the only original member from that classic lineup.
Right, the classic lineup.
That's
we'll
still
go
around.
That. Right.
And they've had, 6 singers since 2011?
I think 6 singers since last week.
Yeah. So
since 2000, yeah, I mean...
If you go to a show and you're not a diehard fan, you don't know what you're getting into.
Right.
And is that really going to see Quiet Riot?
See, now the funny thing, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the bass player is Chuck Wright. And Chuck Wright...
He had a history before, and then he left and came back to the band.
Right. It's been Rudy Chuck for the longest time.
Yeah.
In terms of bass player. So
but he's not an original member.
No, he's not an original member. He was the quote-unquote second bass player of the classic era.
And you're talking the other part of the rhythm section.
Right.
So it's not the guitarist. It's not the singer.
Right.
And
it's a nameless...
Kevin DuBrow passed away, so...
Right.
But...
So, Frankie, he played on Metal Health, played on Condition Critical. He's played on everything
since the Reformation.
And he was there with Kevin through everything, through the ending of the band, the firing of Kevin, because they fired Kevin. They brought in Paul Shortino. And then they came,
Kevin came back.
And then Kevin came back. And then there was a period of time where Quiet Riot broke up. They ended, were over, and then they reformed again. So, yeah, I mean, and Frankie was a part of all that. And now, when Kevin died, they ended the band again. And that was supposed to be the end of Quiet Riot. And Frankie just says, I'm going to restart Quiet Riot. I personally wouldn't have named it Quiet Riot.
No, I would have called it
Metal. See, with everybody, the way everybody does things here, call it mental health or call it condition critical or, whatever.
Well, I say I would do that, but again, is it really his decision, or is it the record company saying, we put out another Quiet Riot album?
At the time, I think it was more Frankie's.
It could be.
And you nor I have seen the documentary that Frankie's put out about Quiet Riot, which I definitely want to see. I hear it's very good.
So maybe we should watch that and
come back and part two
address this part two.
Well, I mean, he had said that he was gonna that Quiet Riot was over, and then a couple years later, after grieving was over, for him, he decided to reform it. I mean, I get it. Like I said, I would have called it maybe Slick Black Cadillac. That would have at least been some homage.
Yeah.
I personally don't think he should have called it Quiet Riot, just because it's not.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say, and we've talked about this before. It's hard for me to want to go see a band when I don't know who the singer is. Put out a couple albums, or at least an album, and I'm interested at least.
Well, I mean, they had Jizzy Pearl for a while, and Jizzy Pearl's done everybody's band that's come out of the LA scene.
Yeah, and that's a tough one for me too. Then it becomes kind of indistinguishable who you're listening to.
True, exactly. And then they had James Turbin from American Idol fame, who was there for a solid bunch of years.
I don't even think it was that long. I think his time in the band was pretty short.
I think it was like 3 years at least, maybe more. But even
maybe so.
I mean, nowadays these years fly by because these albums are few and far in between. I know he did one album with them. Regardless of that, he brought a little bit of stability at the time when they needed it. So you could say, okay, well, Jizzy left. Now they got James Turbin. He was flying the flag for Quiet Riot again. I don't think they should have called it Quiet Riot if you don't have anybody but the drummer. I mean, it's not like Frankie's playing is that distinguishable from the next guy. That's where...
Yeah. That's where it kind of boils down to. It makes it difficult to say, this is... even if it was the most prolific drummer, is it really going to feel like the same thing?
No.
Like, say you got Neil Peart, and you had him in I don't know, you call some other band.
Yeah, any band.
And it's just him. Is that really Rush?
Without Alex and without Geddy, it's not Rush, because there's a certain vibe you get from that. There's a certain, it's not the word aura, but there's a certain gel factor between those players that create that sound that makes it what it is,
Yeah, there has to be at least some of those elements together that make that band.
Right.
That's why I say, like, when Geezer's in Black Sabbath, it feels more like Black Sabbath.
Right, because the bass playing, he's got such a unique... See, now he's unique. His playing, his fingers are so different that it's Geezer playing the bass.
Yeah, and there has to be more than just one of those elements in the conglomeration of the band for you to feel like this is the band.
Right, exactly. And along those same lines with Frankie, another person that's a drummer, Bobby Blotzer from Rat, did the same thing and got the same criticisms and got the same... Well, I mean, Frankie didn't get an ass kicking because Frankie's in control. He was the corporation. Bobby, he thought he was a corporation. I mean, Rat, he was in Rat for the longest time.
So I don't follow Rat. So what?
Well, Bobby was in the original Rat that formed in '82, and he's on every Rat album, much like Stephen Riley. He's on almost every LA Guns album.
Yeah,
Bobby is actually on every Rat album, and he's been there through the ending of the band, the reformation of the band, the reunion of the band, on all of them, until the band went dormant because Warren didn't want to play anymore. Stephen Pearcy was doing his own solo stuff. Juan Crozier was doing his own bass stuff. He had left years earlier. So Bobby's like, dude, I want to play drums, and these are my songs. This is my band. I'm going to go out and play as Bobby Blotzer's Rat Experience. So he wasn't even Rat per se. So he went out as Bobby.
Which is better, at least.
It was, but then he decided to be Rat, and that's where everything went downhill for him. Because the corporation didn't want him going out as Rat. But he's like, you know what? The corporation's not doing anything. So WBS, which was for Warren, Bobby, and Steven, that corporation wasn't doing it. He decided, you know what? I'm taking control of it because they're not coming to the quote-unquote meetings. They're not quote-unquote doing any of the minutes in this corporation. So he took over the corporation and he says, I'm going to be in charge. And he made a new band. It doesn't necessarily work that way because that's not Rat. Warren DeMartini is the last remaining guitar player of Rat. Okay. And even Carlos Cavasso, who became the replacement for Robin Crosby, he wasn't there anymore. You know, so now you don't have Warren, you don't have Carlos, you don't have Steven, you didn't have Juan. I mean, the whole sound of Rat is gone. So what is Bobby doing? He's playing drums to some tribute band. It's like
the original name I could accept, the Rat Experience.
Yeah, the Bobby Blotzer was Rat, exactly. Yeah, sort of like what Jason Bonham's doing.
Yeah,
you know,
he's not calling himself Led Zeppelin,
right?
Which would just be blasphemy.
No, but Robert and Jimmy would hit him over the head with his own drums if he did that, you know. But who else? Steven Adler's Appetite. Okay.
Yeah, I mean he's not going out there calling himself Steven Adler's Guns N' Roses.
But at least Steven did some original music, and guess who was associated with that band? Jizzy Pearl. He's associated with all the LA bands. So Bobby basically got sued. You know, he won one lawsuit against Warren, then lost the lawsuit against Steven with the control of the name. They kicked him out of the corporation. Warren did not want to go back out on tour, but at least he gave the blessing to Steven to go out there and play. And so now Steven and Juan Crocier are back as Rat. They're doing their own thing. And they, you know, recently they were going to do a 2020 tour. And they lost Jungle Boy as their guitar player the other day. They literally couldn't find him. He quit.
Oh, wow.
I don't remember his name, but they just announced it like 2 days ago or yesterday that their guitar player quit. He looks exactly
the joke. Yeah, the joke is that he looks like the Jungle Boy from AEW Wrestling.
Yes. I can't remember Jungle Boy's name right now, but yeah, he looks exactly like him. Except Jungle Boy's 23 years old, and this guy's not.
Looks about 4.
I know.
with sideburns.
Man, this is some serious sideburns for a guy that looks that young.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Bobby, you know, is now not doing anything.
Should have stuck to the Rat Experience.
You know what? And he should do that again if he wants, because they can't take that away from him. You know, so
I mean, he's still part of the history,
right? So who do we have left?
So I believe we're going to talk about the big gun for tonight, Dave Evans.
Dave Evans from AC/DC.
If that doesn't sound familiar, there's a reason for
there's
that.
a reason why. He literally recorded 2 songs with AC/DC, or that got published by AC/DC in 1974. He did Can I Sit Next to You, Girl?
Which you probably know, a version from Bon Scott.
Right. And what's funny was they re-released a single with Bon on vocals. I think it was the same tracks, and they just got rid of Dave's version.
Recorded his vocals.
Yeah, and the B-side was a song called "Rockin' in the Parlor," and that was the B-side to "Can I Sit Next to You, Girl" back in the day.
And I don't know if I've ever heard that one. I might have, but I know I've heard "Can I Sit Next to You, Girl."
I never heard that song before.
You never
I didn't
heard
even
Can
know
I
that.
Sit Next to You?
No, "Rockin' in the Parlor."
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've never heard that one.
I didn't even know the song existed, but I looked it up today, and it said, yeah, it was the B-side. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, cool. Learn something new every day with this AC/DC band. So Dave Evans, he is the reason why we're talking about what we're talking about today, living off a legacy. If I'm criticizing Bobby Blotzer and I'm criticizing Jolan Turner for a cash grab, this dude, Dave Evans, is really, really doing a cash grab and living off the legacy.
Well, they were part of the legacy. You know, they were there. They wrote those songs. They sang those songs. They played the drums on those songs. They were part of it. This guy came in at the beginning, was gone by the time anything important happened, and he's singing songs that he never sang.
So to explain a little bit about the songs he hasn't sang, so the last set list that Dave Evans has done, it was in Mexico City, Mexico, December 14th, 2019. So this is just 2 months ago. He's in Central South America, and he plays Can I Sit Next to You, Girl,
Okay, that one makes sense.
Right? Rockin' in the Parlor. That makes sense.
Okay.
Take Me Down Again, which is an original. Okay.
Makes sense. We're on board still.
And then that's when, this is where he steers off the highway.
The highway to hell.
No. Hell ain't a bad place to be. Yes, okay. So that's off of Let There Be Rock.
Has nothing to do with.
Sold My Soul to Rock and Roll, an original.
Okay.
Put Up or Shut Up, an original. Baby Please Don't Go, which is a cover song, but it was an AC/DC song. It's a song that AC/DC covered. Fine. Aerosmith covered it too. But
is it possible that when he was with AC/DC, they did that as a cover song?
For sure. For sure. Because it's on 74 Jailbreak. So it was something that was done back in that day.
So playing devil's advocate, he possibly did that with AC/DC before.
Definitely. I believe he did.
Okay.
You know, again, it's a cover song, so you can't really blame him for that. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. The main song off of High Voltage. Now,
so that one's questionable.
That one and TNT are questionable.
I got to look at the songwriting credits to see who's on there.
They're probably both Young and Young songs. Here's the thing. I'll give him enough credit on TNT and It's a Long Way to the Top only because those were songs that were probably being written or played at the time of some way, shape, or form. You know, maybe it was an early version of It's a Long Way to the Top. Maybe it's an early version of TNT. I'll give him that much.
I mean, Bond played the bagpipes on It's a Long Way to the Top.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it was recorded with Bond on vocals, but, you know, it could have been written by Malcolm and Angus prior to Bond joining. It could have been something that they...
Bond's got a songwriter credit
on It's a Long Way
to the Top.
Okay. I mean, he could have come up with the lyrics. They could have had different lyrics with Dave. Who knows? We won't know the exact truth to that. Let's go put that much of a, go on that much of a limb for the guy. Okay?
And that's quite the limb.
You know, TNT was the next song. And we'll put that in the same thing because TNT was from the first album in Australia. I get that. But here's where, again, now he's...
Well, wasn't TNT from the second album in Australia? It was on the TNT album, which was the second album.
Yeah, so that's right. It was the second album. But the first album was mostly those cover songs. So
true.
They still could have been being played in the same time frame because they both came out in 75.
That given. Okay.
All right, so we'll give him that. But this is where he already steered off the highway. Now he's on the feeder road. Okay. Highway to Hell.
The feeder road to hell.
The Highway to Hell, Let There Be Rock, and Whole Lotta Rosie. There's no way in the Highway to Hell that any of those three songs have anything to do with Dave Evans.
None.
And that is totally ripping off the fans and saying, hey, look, this is a guy from AC/DC singing these songs. Sorry, no. Not happening. This is the reason why we had this episode, because we were critical. When we saw this the other day, we were very critical of Dave Evans living off this legacy. I mean, he's made more news recently for different AC/DC things
than he has since 1974.
Basically. I mean, think about it. He literally, maybe not, tried to throw his name into the hat when Brian Johnson went down with his ear problem a few years back before Axl Rose came in. He was kind of slipping his name in there. He started talking to the media. Oh, if they ask, I'll do it. No, dude. No one cares. No one wants you. You don't think they would have called you if they wanted you, knowing that you're still around with your hair dyed and your little bandana on your head? No, dude. They didn't want you. Okay. Sorry. So then, okay, well, they don't want me, so I'm going to go do my own thing, and I'm going to sing their songs. Well, yeah, sure, they got paid for it, but still, I mean, come on. To me, you're fooling the fans. And what's worse is that the fans in South and Central America are so rabid for metal, and all the names, that this guy probably had a sold-out show. 500, 600, 700 people, maybe 1,000 people show up at his show. Hey, this is the guy from AC/DC. No. He's not.
But that's the thing. You throw that name on there, and the unaware fan that really just doesn't know the history as strongly as guys like us,
right,
sees, oh, it's a guy from AC/DC.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, and that's.
I mean, that's
what happens with all these bands.
Yeah, to me, that's ripping off the fans.
Yeah.
Bobby is ripping off the fans. Steven is ripping off the fans with his version of LA Guns.
Well, that's like the Rod Evans with the
exactly.
Deep Purple,
and that
showed how bad it can go.
And that was at a time where that stuff wasn't acceptable. It's actually more acceptable now. Frankie's not ripping off the fans because everyone knows Quiet Riot is Frankie and Kevin, and Kevin's
as long
not
as
around.
they're legally protected,
Right?
And that's also a sad.
I mean,
fact.
in Dave's case, he's probably legally protected. He could have gone there and saying Dave Evans, the former vocalist of AC/DC, but
he's not touring as AC/DC.
No, right,
and that's
where Rod went wrong.
Yeah,
I can't believe he even tried to pass that off as Deep Purple. Dave, you know what? Enjoy your time because you know what? At least you get to do it. You're still doing it, but yeah, I think it's just stop singing those songs that don't belong to you. Well, then again, he could be just saying they're cover songs. Do somebody else's cover song. You know,
I mean,
do a Jackal song. You got the same voice.
Well, that being said, and if he's doing it for any of the right reasons, and if he is a fan of Bon Scott, and
he is. That's the other thing. He's a fan of Bon Scott. So there's that to it. I know he's a fan of Bon Scott because I've read the interview, and he is. And he's doing it to keep the music going. I get that. Those are not your songs, and you're passing it off as almost like they are, and that's what and if I'm wrong and he's not, then I apologize. But this is why I'm critical of this, because it's Can I Sit Next to You, Girl is your song. Rockin' in the Parlor is your song. You recorded them. You're on the 45 that still exists somewhere out there. But Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be is not your song. Highway to Hell's not your song. Whole Lot of Rosie's not your song. And Let There Be Rock is definitely not your song. So, yeah, you're doing an AC/DC cover tribute band type thing. I get it because you were an AC/DC, but I don't know. To me, it's a stretch. So
I think for the biggest thing, as long as he's not putting AC/DC in the header, when you see it on the marquee. If there's still marquees out there.
They are, sort of, kind of.
If it's on the sign in front of the bar you're going to go see.
If it's on the headline of the website.
Yeah. If it says AC/DC on there, then he's wrong.
All right. We have come to that point of the show where we need to talk about our Big Four. And this week's Big Four are sophomore albums. Our Big Four sophomore albums. This was really hard for me. Because
there's a lot of good ones.
There's a lot of good second albums out there.
And there's a lot of bad ones. The sophomore slump is real. And going through the list, I definitely recognize it.
Yeah.
I almost want to do a Big Four on the
really shitty ones?
Well, not that, like the biggest sophomore slump.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one too.
But I mean, let's put it this way. I'm just gonna briefly mention what I left off. Okay, so people can understand what I left off. I left off Dawkins' Tooth and Nail, Godsmack's Awake, Guns N' Roses' Use Your Illusions. Does that count as a sophomore? So they put the EP Lies? That's a technicality. I left off...
it's an EP, so we're not counting it.
Judas Priest, Sad Wings, Cinderella, Long Cold Winter, Testament, The New Order. Those ones I left off of my list. Okay, so it gets better from there. But those are really good albums. All of them. Wasp, The Last Command. Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. I left that off. Now, maybe you have it on yours. I don't know. But I left it off mine.
But
here's another one I left off. Pantera's Vulgar Display of Power. But that's like their sixth album.
Yeah, that was the reason I didn't put that on my list. And I think Pantera's always going to be that one that's like sketchy on anything that has to do with history. Mm-hmm. Is because I would love to say that's their sophomore album, but it's really not.
Right.
And
I get that.
Yeah, I did. That's the only reason I left that off, because it is one of my favorite albums.
Right. So, with that being said, let me go ahead and say it so you can wrap it up on your Big Four, since I've already been talking about it. My choices. I'm gonna do this again. I'm gonna throw an honorable mention in there because I can't help
cheating, man.
I'm not cheating. It's an honorable mention. It's not the Big Four. Okay. My honorable mention is Megadeth's Peace Cells.
Okay.
That was a really, really big jump from first album to second album.
A monumental jump.
Yes. I mean, production-wise, songwriting-wise, and the fact that Peace Cells is still a classic played today. Okay. That's my honorable mention. My number 4, Big Four sophomore albums is Saigon Kick's The Lizard.
Really?
Yes. Now, not a lot of people know who Saigon Kick are. Okay, they're a Florida band from Fort Lauderdale / Miami area. They had 3 major label albums and I think 1 or 2 indies. The first 2 albums were the original lineup. The third album, the singer left because they had a very similar voice. They continued on as Saigon Kick with the same, without a new singer.
With Jason Bieler.
Jason Bieler was the guitar player / singer. And they did that for several, the rest of the albums too. I think Matt Kramer reunited later on with them, but I don't think they did.
They've never put out another album.
No. So the first album, in my opinion, was phenomenal. It was in 1990. It was one of the best albums to come out in 1991. That came out the same year as Metallica's Black Album. The second album was a huge jump in production, a huge jump in maturity of songs. Amazing record, top to bottom. I mean, both first and second album are amazing. So, but you could see a jump in songwriting, you could see a jump in maturity, and it was a damn good record. Saigon Kick, The Lizard. That's my number 4.
I'll be honest, I like the first album better. But I also tend to like albums that are more raw. Mm-hmm. And I like first albums by bands. Right. There's just something about it. They've been working on these songs for so long.
For their entire lives.
Yeah. So they put out these albums, Iron Maiden, Kill 'Em All. I mean, just there's so many of them. That
Appetite for Destruction.
Appetite for Destruction, one of the greatest albums of all time. Mm-hmm. It just... Something about that first album. I do like the second album.
The second, I mean, I love both of them. I mean, they're both incredible albums for their own reasons. But as a sophomore record, to me, that is just an incredible sophomore record. So that's my number 4. My number 3 sophomore record is Van Halen 2.
Okay.
And the reason why I picked Van Halen 2, huh?
I know your reason.
That's the first one I got. When I first discovered Van Halen, I went out to the store. I saw a record that had a big VH on the front. I said, "Oh, this is it." I missed the fine print at the time. It wasn't really fine print. The heading at the top of the record said Van Halen 2 written across, and the letters were spaced across. So there's 2 little dash or lines, the eyes at the end. And I'm like, man, all I saw was the VH. It's like, this is it. Went and bought it, and I'm like, where's Eruption? But needless to say, it is a great record, front to back. I mean, I would say
it's one of my favorites of the David Lee Roth era, to be honest.
The only weak song on there would have to be "You're No Good," and that's even still a good song. It's a cover, if I'm not mistaken.
I love "Light Up the Sky."
"Light Up the Sky."
I love "Women in Love."
"Women in Love," beautiful
girls.
Bottoms Up.
Oh man, the whole thing is awesome.
It's awesome record. So that's my number 3. My number 2, big 4 sophomore album, is Ozzy Osbourne's Diary of a Madman.
It's always a good choice.
That is a classic. That is, again, like Saigon Kick, big jump in production, big jump in maturity and songwriting. It was the epitome of what would be Randy Rhoads' career. It is the crescendo, or whatever you want to call it. It was his shining moment. I mean, everyone talks about...
It's his penultimate album, I think is the best way of putting it.
Diary of a Madman, the song, amazing. I love that song. I mean, that song wasn't always my favorite Ozzy song, but it has grown on me so much. It used to kind of scare me with the whole intro as a young kid, but I really love that song now. And having gotten older and know more and more and more about Randy and how he recorded it and his love for classical music, that song just says it all. Now, mind you, Over the Mountain, Flying High Again, Believer, Little Dolls, SATO, all those songs on this album are great. You Can't Kill Rock and Roll. I love that song.
From top to bottom, it's one of those ones that you can listen to from beginning to end and not skip a song.
Exactly. So that's a classic. So,
again, I like Blizzard of Oz better than Diary of a Madman. I want to talk about this on a future episode too. Of
first album versus second album.
Yeah, there's so many people that feel that Diary is that ultimate Ozzy album, and I've just always been more partial to Blizzard. I mean,
of Oz. there's Chris Jericho on his podcast they did their ultimate album clashes, and they had that album clash. Blizzard versus Diary. And if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the guys, it was funny, they were voting all these songs from Diary. as the better song head to head, and ultimately they went with Blizzard of Oz.
Interesting.
Because Blizzard was the first one. There was something special about it. There was a uniqueness. I think the only one was Rich.
Rich Ward?
Rich Ward was, I think he went with Diary because he's a producer, so there was a lot there.
So he has a little bit different perspective on
He had
it.
a much different perspective. So my number one, drum roll please. We should know what this is because
I would be shocked.
Shocking.
Different.
Metallica's Ride the Lightning. And for those, look, Matt, I almost went a whole episode without saying Metallica.
I think I said it more than you did.
Metallica's Ride the Lightning. Okay, first record I bought, first full-length album, because I bought the Whiplash EP first. The first full-length album, I put that needle on. Growing up in the Cold War era of the United States, listening to James talk about fight fire with fire and nuclear war and we all shall die. That was a scary song for me in 1980.
I can see that. Yeah.
I mean, I started listening to it in 85. It came out in 84. So it was scary to me. I think after I pulled my face off the floor because it melted from that first chord, those first chords, I was blown away with Fight Fire with Fire. For Whom the Bell Tolls. I mean, it has Ride the Lightning, Fade to Black, Creeping Death, Trapped Under Ice, Call of Cthulhu, Escape. I mean, I've just named them all. That front to back is hands down a killer album. Creeping Death is my favorite Metallica song, bar none. Okay, I can't get enough of that song. Even For Whom the Bell Tolls, I've heard it a million times, and I still love the bass intro.
I don't get tired of it.
I don't get tired of it. I love Trapped Under Ice. James doesn't like Escape, but it's okay. I like it. Fade to Black is probably my third favorite Metallica song. And my favorite line in a song comes from Fade to Black. Yesterday seems as though it never existed. Death greets me warm. Now I will just say goodbye. I love that line. So there's a lot about Metallica's Ride the Lightning that I love.
He has that tattoo on the tramp stamp. No, I'm kidding.
I do have a Metallica tattoo, but that's not there. So those are my top four, my big four sophomore albums. What you got for me?
For number 4, I've got Rising by Rainbow.
Ooh, that's a good one.
There's kind of a funny story. Back when I was in college, I had a CD player in my car, and I put Rising in, and I never got it out for like the next year because it stuck. I couldn't get the
so it wasn't because you were listening to it over and over again. It was just because it was stuck.
I was listening to it over and over again because I couldn't get my stereo to switch from CD to the radio, and I couldn't get the disc to eject, so it was stuck in there.
I had that problem before.
So for a year, all I could listen to when I was traversing from home to work and home to school, which was over an hour, was a 45-minute album of Rainbow Rising. So even though I love the album and I can listen to any specific song, I really have a hard time listening to it from beginning to end anymore because it's almost like a trauma. But I love the album. It's so well written. It was such a monumental jump from the first album. And it was the beginning of Ronnie really becoming a metal singer.
Yeah.
It was a rock album, a hard rock album, but it had all the makings of what was going to happen.
And they had also replaced the whole band. Ronnie and Richie, the exception, but they replaced keyboards, they replaced drums, and they replaced
it was a new sound.
Bass.
Yeah.
Yeah, they brought in Jimmy Bain, they brought in Cozy Powell.
Yep.
And they brought in...
and nobody hit harder than Cozy.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
And they brought in Tony Carey to play keyboards.
Yeah, it was just such a huge step up. And really, if you haven't listened to the album, go out there, find it. Listen to Stargazer.
It's got a cool cover.
Yeah.
The cover's awesome. With that rainbow and the fist. That's an amazing cover.
Very cool.
Love that.
Well painted. Yeah. So yeah, that's number 4. Number 3, I've got Children of Bodom, Hate Breeder.
Okay.
Man, when I first heard that album and I heard Silent Night, Bodom Night, holy crap! I had never heard drumming like that before. It just anything that they did after that, the drumming was just so intense. Mm-hmm. It was what like really led the songs along. All the parts together, the keyboards just went perfectly with the guitars, went perfectly with the singing. It was just so well meshed. And for a band that had only put out one album before, and these guys were all real young, it was incredible. It was just kismet. You know, there was, and they did one more album out after that, which was in the same similar style. But there was just something so raw about that album that was just, it was clean and dirty at the same time, and it's hard to describe.
Yeah, no, I kind of get what you're saying. Yeah.
They were a little more produced, or a little more together on the next album, which I love, but at the same time, there's just something about that evolution, that early stages. Was there
a change in lineup on the second album?
No.
Okay.
The first three albums the first four albums had the same lineup.
Okay.
So number 2 is Megadeth with Peace Cells.
Okay.
What you were saying earlier is just such a monumental jump from the first album. The songwriting was so much better. Wake Up Dead. What a great way to start that.
Yeah, that's a great song.
And so much meaning behind the songs. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you really look into it, you can find all kinds of information he said about what the songs were about.
Yeah.
You know, the Wake Up Dead was him cheating on his girlfriend with another girl. He did a couple songs about this specific woman.
Right. Diana.
Yeah, Diana. Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff, but the song Peace Cells.
Oh, it's the bass line.
The bass line alone
is incredible.
Mind-blowing.
Peace Cells is a great record. Beyond that, it's one of those, it's a long lasting, you know, it doesn't go away. It doesn't get old for sure. Mm-mm. You know, and as old as it is, you know, being back from 1986,
it doesn't feel old.
No, not at all. It's a great record. They have they definitely matured a lot, and that's where you began to see Dave Mustaine's sarcasm. You know, with the way he did the lyrics in Peace Cells, the song.
Well, I think he kind of, you know, that first album was so rushed. Their pressure to put it out was you know.
Well, they spent all the money.
Exactly. So they didn't really put out the product that they wanted to put out. And I think, you know, the situation with These Boots. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they put out the album, they put out the song, and then they get criticized for it being, you know, a dirty version, and it just, all that kind of put a sour taste in his mouth, and he's like, you know what, we're just going to do what we're going to do.
Yeah. Oh, you can see he definitely got mature and pissed off. Mm-hmm. You know, and then he did the cover of I Ain't Superstitious, mm-hmm. which was good on there. So you could see that he was a totally different person in the next album. And you got to also think mechanics on Killing Is My Business was left over from Metallica. Mm-hmm. I would say a lot of those riffs were left over from stuff that he didn't give Metallica.
Yeah, and it was all part of that songwriting process.
Right, so you can, you know, now he's got an album that he's got to basically come up from scratch.
And he's working with these new guys.
Right. And he's
David Ellefson.
Right. And I mean, who was on it was the same band on the second album, wasn't it?
I believe so.
Gar Samuelson and
the same band for those two albums.
Was it Chris Poland?
Chris Poland.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot to be said about that.
And things changed after that. Mm-hmm. Marty Friedman brought in. And
well, first it was a Jeff guy. There was Beeler on drums.
Jeff Beeler. Yeah.
And there was a Jeff on guitar. Jeff
Young.
But he was the one that was on So Far So Good So What. Marty and Nick came in for Rust in Peace.
All right, so my number 1 might surprise you because it's probably the only time that they'll be on my number 1, but that would be Metallica with Ride the Lightning.
Oh wow, cool!
It's a fantastic album. There's no denying it.
No, for sure.
And when I really think about the impact that it had on me, it was the second Metallica album I ever owned, and I've listened to it so many times. I mean, even to this day, if I'm going to pick one to just listen to randomly, it's most likely going to be Ride the Lightning. The second choice would be Master of Puppets. That particular album, it's just solid from beginning to end.
Oh yeah,
it really is. It's To me, it's their best written, best recorded album.
I would disagree on that, even though it's my favorite Metallica record. I think there definitely was an upgrade when they went to do Master of Puppets. In my opinion.
Yeah, and I understand that, but I don't always think the better produced record is a better album.
No, it's not. It's not necessarily the case.
And it's not always a better sound.
It's weird. You sit there and you put the three records together, and when you say three, you're talking about Ride, Master, and Justice. Okay. And Justice being kind of almost an outcast because Cliff's not on it. But Kill 'Em All is separate because even though it was Cliff era, the songwriting was a little bit before Cliff got totally involved.
Well, Justice still only had original members on it.
Right. Yeah. So Justice is considered part of the classic four.
Yeah.
The songwriting progressively on each of the three, to me got better. That also shows why Ride is such a good record. I wouldn't
agree with better. I would say more mature.
Yeah.
Because there is more maturity between Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning. Mm-hmm. But better, I don't know if that's 100% true.
You think about a song like Master of Puppets itself. Mm-hmm. Okay, that is a classic.
It's a great construction of song.
Exactly. It's a blend of several different riffs. It's different song ideas. 8 minutes long, and you don't feel it. You don't feel 8 minutes on that, and that's a sign of a good song. Battery, Damage Incorporated, Disposable Heroes. To me, the weakest song on the album is Leper Messiah.
Yeah,
the thing that should not be, Welcome Home. See, Welcome, like you compare, because you can easily compare song for song, Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. Right? Introduction songs or introductory songs. You got Fight Fire with Fire versus Battery. There's a maturity in Battery. Now, is the song better? Who knows? It's up. That's opinion.
It's subjective.
Right, it's objective. Ride the Lightning versus Master of Puppets.
Subjective. No, I said objective.
Subjective. Master of Puppets versus Ride the Lightning. Master of Puppets blows Ride the Lightning away. Okay? Thing that should not be...
That's subjective. Because, yes, it's a really well-constructed song. But you have to think about people's aesthetic. You have to think about what makes a great song for you and what makes it like the strike of Ride the Lightning. It's just raw.
It is. I'm not as big a fan, I guess, of Ride the Lightning itself, the song, as you are.
Yeah.
I like Master of Puppets a lot better. But in my opinion, Master of Puppets blows Ride the Lightning as a song away.
But they're different too.
They're different.
You like Ride the Lightning it just gives you this feeling of claustrophobia when you're listening to it.
I could see that.
And Master of Puppets is more of a story being told.
Right.
So they're like one's hey, I'm about to die, and one's this is the effects of drugs.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
They both kind of deal with death in a weird way.
Mm-hmm.
Death and destruction. For Whom the Bell Tolls versus Thingy, two different songs, but they're both heavy bass songs. You can easily compare Fade to Black and Welcome Home because they're both slow starters. Mm-hmm. Up-tempo choruses that come back down. Although I would say Sanitarium's more up-tempo as far as the chorus is concerned because Fade to Black's chorus really doesn't exist. There is no chorus.
Yeah.
But yet it's there. Again, to me, Fade to Black is... when I saw them in January last year, they played Fade to Black. I didn't care if they didn't play Welcome Home Sanitarium because damn, Fade to Black was played. And then there's... Song for song, you can't compare Creeping Death. Creeping Death would have to go against Damage Incorporated because you got the instrumentals are flip flopped.
Yeah.
Orion over Cthulhu,
Yeah.
So
sure.
To me, Creeping Death versus Damage Incorporated, they're both really great songs. But Creeping Death is my favorite song, so yeah, that's a Ride song. But Disposable Heroes to me is better than Trapped Under Ice. Although. They're two different songs, but Trapped Under Ice is incredible.
I would pick Trapped Under Ice of the two.
Yeah, I like them both.
Yeah.
But they're two different structured songs. You can see where Metallica was heading with throwing in all the riffs that they eventually did in Justice for All, where they just put in 10,000 riffs into 9 songs.
The fact is, songs from one album to the other, they're cohesive. But if you put one song from Ride the Lightning on Master of Puppets, it wouldn't feel right.
No, it wouldn't fit.
So, as young as they were, and fresh from making the first album, they put together a solid album from beginning to end. And I have to pick it as number one.
All right, well, there you go. Both of us have Metallica's Ride the Lightning as our number one sophomore album. Chris, what else you got?
All right, so next week we're going to introduce a new segment. What should you be listening to? So we're just going to talk about albums that may have slipped through the cracks, or that mean something to us that we think you should listen to,
or something that we feel, yeah, exactly. Like we feel that we're listening to, and it's like, hey, you know what? We should share this.
Albums that maybe didn't get a lot of attention, or stuff that we've just come into contact with that you got to hear it.
Cool. Well, I look forward to that.
All right. Well, that's it for Debating Metal this week. You can listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, or wherever you consume your podcasts. If you enjoyed our show and agreed with our opinions, or just want to rip us a new one, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or you can email us at debatingmetal@gmail.com. I'm Chris Kaye, and on behalf of Kenneth Dean, we'll see you next week.
Bye.